I first got the idea for this after watching a bunch of other VFX artists try this interactive effect, like Zach King, who I think popularized it.
Turn your phone upside down in 3, 2, 1.
I thought it would be a funny twist if the person in the video being messed with actually managed to escape the phone. Now, I guess this project was gonna be really hard, so I ran some tests and was surprised to see how easy some of the effect might be, and that motivated me to keep going. Now, to be all super meta and deep or whatever, I thought it would be cool if the person who shakes the phone ends up inside of it, thanks to, let's say, a mirror held up to society. But since the person inside the phone is trapped, it occurred to me that somehow the person shaking it has to get trapped. I remember thinking, what kind of a room has a mirror in it that you can get trapped in? And that's when my roommate said,
that's a closet.
Now, I don't actually have a huge closet in my house big enough to bounce around in, so I had to make one by turning my kitchen into a fake closet, which was by far not the weirdest thing my roommates have had to put up with that week. I set up my desk with a computer and some Easter egg props and put it next to this fake closet, and I was ready to film. Now, I did all the recording myself, using my old iPhone in my right hand as the phone I'm shaking, and then in my left hand, I was holding my Galaxy Note 10 to film everything in the really helpful ultra-wide lens. To really sell that the little guy was interacting with the world he was in, I had him push over these tags. Now, this was a practical effect done by tying a super thin string, actually a hair from a wig. Little helpful tip for all those weirdos out there who make sketches and have tons of wigs. I tied this hair string from the tacks to my left leg. So operating this scene was a little like this. After I triggered the tacks, I got up and walked into this fake closet. Then I look up at the mirror, which is of course not real. To film what we would see in the mirror, I put the camera where the mirror would be and pointed it back at myself as I enter this closet. I then had my friend close the door behind me. Nope, that is not actually how my door closes. I had to take the door off the hinges to make the scene, and that's what I do for you guys. Then I react to being trapped and the giant text that pops up, and I say, no, no, no. I jump, and this starts the shaking cycle. But I still had to do a lot of digital cleanup to this shot, so I took a still shot of it and brought it into Photoshop. I copy, pasted, and clone stamped the hell out of it, getting rid of the side door and expanding the ceiling and walls to give me a lot more room to work with. I then brought this back into After Effects and used masks to blend it with the actual footage. Thankfully, in the actual footage, I never cross over the left side. And by the time I'm bouncing around, that's all green screen footage, which I could easily place over the Photoshopped walls and ceiling. Speaking of bouncing around using green screen, my first approach was to just film me doing a bunch of different bounces and edit them together. But I quickly found out how lame it looked if the timing and movement weren't actually realistic. So I made this tiny man shaking simulator and found out that if you shake a box with a person in it with your right hand, they'll bounce around very quickly in a rough circle with some slapping back and forth. So I went back again and did a bunch of green screen bounces, landing and rotating to continue the circular movement, and I did way too many of these tests, including some for when I fall from above, and also tried one where I just rolled around, filmed from above. Thankfully, my downstairs neighbors are saints, or just haven't found the right hitman yet.
Let's leave it at that.
I put these together and tried making a realistic sequence that was also kind of funny. In After Effects, I put this composition inside of a larger composition that was animated to shake in time with a real phone shake, so I could test it. After about a bazillion hours, I got something that I liked. Now, at least one person did notice this tie in the background, flopping around and adding some realism, and it's one of those little bits of flair that I'm proud of killing myself over, so thanks for noticing. I tried a few different methods to do this, but settled on pinning the tie to a green screen that I could shake. I left the edges visible so I could track the sides of the green screen and stabilize the footage to get a relatively centered tie that just flops around insanely. Then all I had to do was key it out. I put this over the hook and time remapped it roughly to match the shaking, and then since of course me flopping around is green screen, I could go over this tie anyway. I did something similar with these green screen versions of the other stuff in the closet, the shoe rack and bathrobe. Would it be great if, like Zach King, I had an entire production studio to build my own sets? Yeah. But since I don't, I'm left having to hack it all together using practical effects, Photoshop, and green screen. To put the shaking video in the actual phone, I tried all sorts of camera tracking effects using the camera tracker and Mocha, and just basically gave up and manually ended up keyframing a null to get the position, parenting my clip to that, and then adding a corner pin effect and manually keyframing that to get the right skew as the phone turns. Now I know that sounds like a lot of work, but for short spans of time, it's usually not worth it to spend the time correcting an auto tracker. It's best to just suck it up and just do it manually. Now to get it to actually show up behind the phone, I of course keyed out the green that was actually on my phone using key light. Now, a cool trick to add back glare and reflections to add realism is to duplicate the keyed footage and put it underneath, but then remove the key. Then I use HLS color balance to desaturate it, and curves to increase the contrast. For this layer, I set the blending mode to add so that it mixes with the footage of the shaking video underneath, and all I have to do is adjust the opacity until the glare looks natural. Alright, now to escape the phone and become this little guy. I initially thought this would be the hardest part, but it turned out to be really easy. All I had to do was film myself running around over a giant green surface I could key out, and most of Earth happens to be green, especially AstroTurf. Now to get those shots from high up, obviously all I had to do was catch a bird and duct tape a GoPro to it, and then let it go. Unfortunately though, my GoPro bird didn't come back to me, which left me no choice but to use my drone. I have an Anafi Parrot drone, which I absolutely love. It films in gorgeous 4K. It's one of the only cameras in this price point that has optical zoom and can also film up. I film myself leaping, tumbling, freaking out, splatting, leaping again, tumbling, dodging, pushing the tacks, jumping, landing, and then running into the eventual little mouse hole in the wall. After about 1 million takes, I limped off the field and biked home, hoping that everything would work out. Based on what I saw with my initial tests, I wasn't actually surprised when everything did work out great. Firstly, to isolate myself from the footage, I put this clip into a pre-comp where I warp stabilized the drone footage and used masks and key light to get rid of everything that wasn't me. Now, I intentionally filmed the footage on an overcast day, so I wouldn't get any shadows and keying would be easier. But to help sell that my character was actually on the scene, I actually wanted to add back a shadow. So in this pre-comp, I duplicated my footage, squashed it down a bit, added a layer style to make it dark, added a blur, and then lowered the opacity for my fake shadow. Now to get the drone footage to match the desk scene, all I had to do was camera track the desk scene. Then using the 3D camera tracker effect, I right-clicked on the ground and created a solid, again to use as a 3D stand-in just to hold the position. I brought in the cleaned up drone footage pre-comp, made it 3D, and then pasted onto it the 3D positioning from that solid. All I had to do then was adjust the 3D position, scaling, maybe add a few keyframes, and get the timing right to get things to stick and match, and I was really impressed with how easy it was to sell this effect. Now, there are a few times when little me is supposed to come out of or go into things, and to cover me up, I would just duplicate the original background scene footage and use masks and or track mats to create a cover up layer. In some cases, I would use a solid that was also camera tracked to match objects like the desk, use a mask to make it desk shaped, and then use this as a mat in the track mat effect to have my footage disappear behind things like the desk, which hide my transition from jumping to landing. Then, of course, once I land, I trip over this sock, which is another one of those little pre-planned Easter eggs to sell the effect of Little Man in Big World, and big ups to Ryan Hovland here for pointing it out and asking how I did it. I filmed it on a green screen in the same location so the lighting matched, then pulled it with a little string and keyed it out. But of course, this sock has to exist in the world the whole time, so I actually had to camera track the entire scene and then spend hours fixing this so the sock actually looks like it's in the right place at the right time, at the right angle, and then deal with masks and track mats to make it appear under the desk. Not to mention then having to make sure it also appears in the mirrored world and then deal with this door closing, which as you can see all in all was a lot of work for a sock, but apparently maybe worth it. Thank you, Ryan. Once I land, I of course eventually run into this mouse hole. The mouse hole was created by taking a freeze frame copy of the footage, then turning it 3D and using the camera tracking technique to stick a still image of the footage basically to itself. I shifted its positioning though so that the ground could continue into the mouse hole. With some feathered masks and keyframe color correction, I got this fake continued ground to match the footage as it changes. To get the dark upper arch of the mouse hole, I just used a similar combination of 3D camera tracking using solids, masking to create the arch, roughen edges to roughen it out, and then some drop shadow layer styles and color correction to apply the darkness over everything underneath it.
And now for that mirror which reflects back on our Sisyphusian peril, entrapping us in a pretty cool video loop.
Now to get the shaking scene, which actually is the content in our mirror, stuck to the wall, no surprise, I used camera tracking, and these little tape markers on the wall were a big help. Once I had a good track, I right-clicked, created a solid, grabbed that 3D positioning of the solid, and pasted it on my video that will be in the mirror. But of course, to make it look more like a mirror, I added an actual photo of a mirror border, made it 3D, positioned it correctly, and used some blending modes and layer styles to mesh it with the real footage. But here's the thing. What you see in a mirror is a reflection of a 3D world, not a flat 2D one, so my video clip is looking weirdly flat on the wall. To fix this, I put the video clip in a pre-comp, and then I used a really cool trick, and there's lots of tutorials on this. If you create a reference layer, in this case I'm using shape layers to do it, where the brightness values relate to the depth of a 3D scene you're trying to simulate, then you can use this depth map
as the reference map in the displacement map effect, which in this case I've added to an adjustment layer over my clips. In this case, the horizontal and vertical distortion values will create a shift in your image that looks very much like a perspective shift relative to the 3D depth you've created. I actually ended up dragging these vertical and horizontal values up to the essential graphics panel so that I could back out of this pre-comp and control those values on the outside of the nested comp. I could adjust and keyframe them so that the perspective shift in the mirror coincided realistically with what we would expect to see based on the movement of the actual camera. And that got me a pretty realistic virtual 3D mirror world. To further sell that this was a mirror and not just a hole in the wall, I added some scum and scratches to the photograph of the actual mirror frame. Since this frame and mirror surface remain flat, the juxtaposition of its movement over the dynamic movement of the simulated 3D world underneath creates a subtle offsetting, which is actually what we see with a real mirror. So I was watching the result of my hard work when it hit me, there's no reflection of the tiny me that I'm supposed to be chasing in the mirror. Embarrassingly, I hadn't thought of it, so I had to just go out and film another version of me running towards the mouse hole, but this time from the front. I plopped that into the mirror pre-comp, didn't have to worry about camera tracking because it's a static shot, and managed to solve that problem before any of you lucky folks could have told me I f***ed up in the comments. The next thing I had to do was add some digital scaling and use a bit of corner pin to force this mirror frame to fill the frame of the actual video so that when we complete our loop, all we see is me trapped in your phone, so to speak. And of course we hold onto this framing all the way until we get to the shaking part. And there we have completed the loop. So that's how I did the bulk of this video. Lots of camera tracking and green screen, as you might have expected. But this wouldn't be an Alex Ezorsky video if there weren't tons of minute details that took me dozens of hours and most of you probably didn't notice. Like for example, the fact that on the computer screen in this scene, we actually have a still shot of the process of making the video itself, which obviously was camera tracked and added later. I don't know, maybe all these little details did add to the final product and maybe you did catch them. Let me know in the comments and let me know how you felt about this video.
Thanks for watching.